Hello, my name is Michela Abrams, founder of Mocha Plus. Welcome to our Collective Conscience series. We created this series for you to bring together great minds from around the world on myriad topics that we hope will expand your mind, will challenge your current beliefs, and give you an opportunity to be inspired with every video. Enjoy. This is our 30th Collective Conscience night, and there was just something about that as I was writing that to Jody and reminding Shelley, albeit since she announces it wasn't much of a reminder that she needed. But it's exciting because we've continued as promised with a wide array of diverse speakers, all of whom are meant to bring you an hour to get out of your heads, and therefore get out of any, current stress. And heaven knows there's plenty for you to choose from. And also to begin the week to give you new thoughts, inspirations, ways to view things. We have gotten a great deal of input about, we're all having some modicum of mental health issues. Couldn't you find somebody who, and it did not take me 30 seconds after Shelley and I said, that's important, to call Jody Burr. I have known Jody since our kids were in first grade together. And if I fast forward through that to 2012, when she was just entering, 2011, when she was just entering the profession, having had an amazing, successful high-tech career, she said, I'm doing my hours and I'd love to, just sit and work with you. I said, oh, absolutely. Well, little did I know I'd be entering the first of what were many tough chapters in the 4 years to follow that. And I cannot and do not exaggerate or say this just because Jody's here as our guest. It was game-changing for me in the way in which I was able to handle that, to really have someone who didn't try and answer things for me or grab me by the shoulders and move me to a different place, which there were days when I kind of wish she would, but she knew that wasn't the right thing because I needed to have the tools to help myself, and I did. So without further ado, Jody, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a special treat.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to be here, and I've seen so many great different salons that you guys have done. So I'm just very honored to be part of it, and to just hear everybody and take any questions. So I'm honored.
Wonderful. Well, so one of the things that I thought we'd start with, because there are therapists of all kinds, there are mentors and coaches of all kinds, but I thought just to set the stage for everyone, tell us a little bit about the kind of coaching you do and the philosophy of that coaching.
Okay. Well, and there are differences between therapists and mentors and coaches. And really quickly, a coach is somebody that you partner with. It's a relationship that's tailored to what you want, what your goals are, who you are, what your values are. And then we work in partnership to get you where you want to go. And the training I've had and certifications I've had has a philosophy that I really believe in. And the philosophy is people are creative and resourceful and whole. And it's not about fixing anybody. It's about helping an individual and their own internal resources move in the direction they want to go. And through a partnership and tailoring it specifically to that person and what motivates that person, what's important to that person, we go from there.
Excellent. By the way, our Collective Conscience community, which I think you know because you've been a member of that community and joined us for a number of the salons, we have Gen Z and millennials and Gen X and boomers and even seniors. So I'm proud to say that we have all 5 consuming generations as
that's quite something. that's quite something to have all different generations.
And it's
Maybe a grandchild on someone's lap once in a while.
and what's great is that this topic, of course, is applicable to each of those generations
Right.
for myriad reasons, some of which are the same and many of which are different because of our life stages. So the reason that we actually called this, "What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid?" I have to be honest, it was a poster given to me by Amy Westbrook when I left Dwell and kind of put a bow on every change in my life that could have happened, from losing a lot of people in my family to deciding that I'd start everything over again except my home. And the freedom that I had at that time, as you well remember, just I felt like I could fly. So even after all that had gone on, and truly still in the midst of change and a future that I didn't plan to recraft on my own, I still felt great because of the tools that you gave me, and because I knew that being stuck in any stage of fear was going to be the last thing that I could do that was ever going to help me move forward in whatever the right path was, and not needing to know, importantly, as you reminded me, what that path was going to be. It wasn't that assurance of the future, it was just what we were doing at that moment. So needless to say, that fight or flight hormone that hits us all when we're in that mode of, oh my God, what next? And this just feels like I want to run. And of course, we know that originally it was because we were running from lions and tigers and bears. Since we're not doing that at present, but it's 2020, so who knows? What is it that we can do to mitigate that, to turn off that cortisol effect? What are some of the simple things that we can do to catch ourselves before that tumbles into something that feels so grave?
Right, right. I don't know if you're familiar with Viktor Frankl. He is the 4-time death camp survivor, survivor of multiple death camps. He was a neurologist and a psychologist. And he has a saying that is, there is a space between stimulus and response. And in that space, we have the power to choose. And in that choice lies our freedom. And so part of it, the first step is just recognizing that in between stimulus and space, there is a space. In between stimulus and response, there is a space. And it's important to know that and to take that space. We tend to think that we've got to react emotionally, or our brain will create a story, or we'll think of a catastrophe that we have to act now. But the first step is just realizing there's a space, and you get to take that space. And what we don't want to do is just react from emotions. We want to ask ourselves a couple of questions, and this will help us take that space. And one question is, how I'm reacting or how I want to respond, is that going to help me? So that's one thing to ask. The other thing is to ask is there an alternative way to engage? That's another question just to sit and contemplate. And then another question to ask yourself is, are my actions serving the person that I want to be? So those are 3 questions to ask yourself if you're feeling like you're in that reactive space, and you get to take time. You don't have to respond immediately. So take a deep breath, stop and reflect on it. Sometimes too, the emotion that we're feeling, actually what's underlying that emotion is a value of ours. And if you can figure out what's the value under the emotion that you're feeling, like feeling lonely, maybe the value is wanting connection and connectedness. And so act then from the value of connection, or try to figure out, if you can, what that value is there, and come at it from that value. So that's one way to do it. Take that space, ask yourself those 3 questions. Is this helping me? Are there alternative ways to engage? Are my actions serving me? Am I being the person I want to be? Is there a value under the emotion that's important to me that I can then come at from that? Another just tip is if there's somebody that you really respect and admire, you can always ask yourself, what would they do in this situation? We're trying to change our perspective, and sometimes we can feel so locked into our perspective it's hard to see another way. But if you think about somebody that you admire and just ask yourself, what would they do? That can also bring you a flood of information of another way to come at things that can also be just as genuine maybe for you, but can shift the dynamic so you're not just stuck in one perspective. Does that make sense?
I think it certainly makes sense to me. And it's interesting because when we were 2 weeks ago discussing gratitude and resilience with Chip and Nancy, he brought up Viktor Frankl and this whole idea. And it's so powerful. I mean, you just talked about accessing someone whom you admire and thinking about, okay, what would they do? Well, if you think about what Viktor Frankl went through, right? Which, as hard as 2020 has been, it certainly doesn't even begin to compare to his journey. I can't even imagine. So for him to be able to point out such a salient moment to make that change and to have that choice, I think it's finding the tools to know when to recognize the space, right? That becomes the next thing, like, oh my God, did I just miss that moment? You know, did the door close? Do I not have the opportunity? Or I didn't notice the space. When was the space there? What, you know?
We don't think it's there because we just jump into our emotion, but our emotions don't own us. We aren't just our emotions. So we can acknowledge our emotions, see our emotions, even feel our emotions, but we don't have to react from that emotion. And you're right, he went through horrific experiences. And it was so interesting. He was a neurologist and a psychologist. So he also had that full brain and behavior perspective. And if he can see in the midst of concentration camps that there is a space, and just sometimes knowing that there is a space allows us to just step back for a minute, take a deep breath, and realize we have more options. And those options get to really reflect who we want to be in the moment with it.
So in the time, and I'll speak generally for everyone on tonight, I'd say pretty much people are emotionally exhausted. We're on compassion overload.
Yeah.
And we're trying, each of us, I think, each day to reset so that we do not only see that space, but understand that it's okay to see and find something good in this time also.
Right.
Because if we miss that opportunity, then we will all look back at our lives individually, as a group, as a community, as a country. I mean, you name the segments, and say, yes, we certainly made sure that it was as bad as it could have been, rather than can we take that opportunity to see the positive and to feed on that. Tell me what you think about that as an opportunity for people that you work with. Do you find that is very effective to say, let's look at the opposite side? What if the best outcome happened?
So let me just make sure. So what you're asking is, how do we stop and take that kind of time to get grounded? And there are a couple of different things you can do. And so realizing there's a space between stimulus and response is one thing, but to just throughout all of this, to try to have some grounding. There, different things work for different people. There's no one blanket, here's what you do. For some people, it's being in nature. For some people, it's doing meditation. For some people, it's doing something creative. One thing I've found that works for many people, not all, is Rachel Naomi Remen. She has written a couple of books. She's a physician. She runs a place called Commonweal. But her advice is every morning, write 3 pages. It doesn't matter what you write. But you want it to be early enough before your mind gets just so busy with everything. But just write 3 pages. You can throw it away afterwards. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct. It doesn't have to have correct punctuation. It can be anything. But what it does when you do that in the morning, and you can either write 3 pages or write for 10 minutes, but what it does is it kind of gives you a direct line to your subconscious, to your wiser self before everything gets filled in with a lot of noise. And sometimes just writing those 3 pages, you'll be surprised at what comes up. And having that as a practice can be very, very grounding, and you can get very surprising things out of it. So that's also another way of just dealing with kind of the craziness that's going on and just remain grounded. Does that make sense?
It does. And I want to make sure to point out that it's not a nuance here, that it's not about typing the pages.
Right.
It's writing, physically writing it, which taps on Nancy Davis Coe, again, one of our first collective conscious speaker, and then came back for Fall Pairings with Chip, that study, right, at the Happiness Center in Berkeley said that it is totally different, the activity on the brain when you're writing. So the idea, you get out of bed or maybe you don't get out of bed, you prop up your pillows and grab your pad and start writing for 10 minutes or 3 pages or whichever comes first.
Right. You can have a pad of paper and a pen by your bed. You can get up, and if you have to have coffee first, do that. But before the day gets going too much, just write and see what comes up. But also know what charges your battery. What charges one person's battery doesn't work for somebody else. So really pay attention to what gives you energy, what helps you feel grounded, and make that a priority. Make sure you have time during the day, even if it's 5 minutes for meditation. And it doesn't have to be some huge time commitment, but just make time every day. Or don't get caught up in I missed it one day, I've blown it. It's progress, not perfection. Even if you say, I'm going to do it 4 days a week, and give yourself some flexibility so you can sustain it. But work into your day something that helps recharge your battery.
And is this, speaking of generations, do you find any difference with that exercise or the outcomes from young people who we have tonight in their 20s all the way to people in their 80s and 90s?
It really depends so much on temperament. For some people, it's walking, regardless of the age, that is how their brains calm down. For other people, even some of my clients who are in their 20s, it's writing. So it just really depends. It's knowing what works for you and maybe trying different things. People who are much older are also meditating or writing. So I haven't found that there's one that works per generation necessarily. It's more of temperament, more of how your individual brain works.
Got it. I want to talk a little bit about resilience, because it has been a topic with different speakers on Collective Conscience, but specifically as it regards our ability to move through this time and any other very hard times in an individual's life. We have to call upon that, right, in order to get through without losing our minds, right, or worse. Right. Do you think that resilience is innate, that some people are inherently more resilient than others? Or do you believe we're all born with some sense of that and it's just a matter of proper nurturing and training?
I think it's both. I think some temperaments have a little bit more built-in resiliency than others. But I think resiliency is very much learned as well. And I think that we none of us really give ourselves enough credit for actually all the resiliency that we have. People tend to look at, what do I need to do, or what haven't I accomplished? And we tend to be very forward looking, which is very advantageous, but we tend to not look at all the things we've had to navigate, negotiate, figure out. We just look at what we haven't done. But so I think we're all more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And one way to look at it and see if this makes sense, it's not, am I going to be ready when the thing happens, when the bad thing happens? Because unexpected things are always going to happen. But it's realizing that I've dealt with difficult things before. I have internal resources to deal with it. I have external resources that I can tap into to help. I can ask a friend for help. It's knowing that things are going to be thrown your way and that you have more resources than you realize to deal with it. And so it's not, don't let things happen. But if you want to grow your resiliency, if you feel like there's a resiliency piece or something you want to be better at, one of the kind of tricks in coaching that we do is identify one thing that you want to grow, one thing you want to incorporate. And you do 3 yeses and 3 nos. The 3 yeses are, what are 3 things I can do that will support the growth of that? And really pay attention to what those 3 things are. And then you look at, what are 3 things I have to say no to that will undermine that? And because roadblocks are going to happen. And so it's not, don't have any roadblocks. It's, what are the likely roadblocks? How do I want to deal with them? And if you do that, pick one thing, pick 2 things you want to grow or change, and do 3 yeses and 3 nos, and do that. And you will start growing, whether it's resiliency, if there's a certain area of resiliency you want to focus on, you can try that and see it will take you someplace.
So that, I have a piggyback question on that, because Scott Adams, for instance, the Dilbert author, right? In his book that is now easily 23 years old, The Dilbert Future, had a very serious part in the back of this book about the fact that the way he got there, the way he succeeded in being perhaps the most successful political cartoonist, was that every day he would write 15 times the assumptive close, I am the most successful political cartoonist, or the most successful satirist. Yeah. And he said there's no doubt in his mind that it was that propelled him into doing that, that without that, he absolutely believes that would not have happened. Yeah. As we've talked about writing things and how that has the brain react instead of typing or texting. And you just mentioned this about the 3 yeses and 3 nos. I mean, I feel like I know it's not as simple as simply constantly writing the positive or the affirmative, but it seems that every time somebody, an author like this, or a wise person comes into the conversation and says, but it really is about our intentions. It's just interesting that continues to show itself no matter the topic. Is this part of your specific practice and as you're guiding people as their partner in this?
Yeah, and we'll do a lot of things to help reinforce that, because you're priming your brain. You're giving yourself a message that your subconscious is chewing on. There are different things you can do, like you can prime your brain right before you fall asleep. If there's a problem you want to solve, you can think about it, or think about it right before you fall asleep, or ask yourself about it, and your subconscious will chew on it. Or there are many, many techniques. You can write and leave notes for yourself that are priming the brain. And for different people, different things work better. Visual people need to see something. If somebody might be, it might be something that they've got to touch, like a sign. I have a client who put a sign above their doorway that they had to hit every time they walked by every time they walk through the door, and it was their goal. And, every day they hit that and they made that goal. But so there are many things you can do like that just keep it in the forefront of your brain, and it starts informing your actions and what you do. It starts changing how you feel about things.
But am I the only one whose brain wakes them up at 3 a.m. to go over what I have not done in the last 40 years? I don't know.
I don't think you're alone in that one, Michela.
No.
Everybody raised their hand right now, but I.
So it looks like there is somebody besides me you can call.
Yeah. That's really why we became business partners, so we could work from 3 to 6 in the morning. So, this year has been a reset of epic proportion, right? And I think that it would be nice if there were just a fix. So perhaps I'm asking you the impossible, but would you advise that people, since it's a reset anyway, just go for it and reach for something or do something that they thought was crazy or otherwise impossible? Or is this a time to steady as she goes?
Well, I don't think there's one universal answer. So it depends on the individual. I'm always for go bold. If that's something that resonates for you, if that's something that really strikes a nerve for you, then go bold. If it's something that doesn't feel right, that your intuitive hit is this is not the time, pay attention to that. But maybe redefine what is success in COVID times. What does that look like? And base it on that. And what do you need to do to reach that goal? And maybe it's just identify what the next step is. If success is, if COVID success, look at COVID success on a scale of 1 to 10. And 10 is I'm there, I've done it. 1 is I'm nowhere. Rate yourself on that scale of 1 to 10. Where are you when you identify COVID success? And whatever number you're at, figure out what would it take for me? What would it take to get me to the next number? What would it take for me to go from a 5 to a 6 or a 5 to a 7? Focus there. And that's another way to do it, where you can keep pursuing things, but adjust to the times. Go big if that feels right. If that doesn't feel right, that's okay too. But rate yourself and see what are those incremental things I can do. What will bump my number up 1 or 2? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's so. There are so many ideas and tools, if you will, that you've shared with us. When you are working with your clients, is this weekly? But I'm sure this varies too. Some people probably would like to talk to you every day. I know I did at that point. And some people are fine with once a week. But what in practice, the things we're talking about, the writing things down, the yeses and the nos, the putting the intention in your mind, is this like a meditative practice, would you say?
It's I wouldn't call it a meditative practice, but it is a practice where it's not just on the surface. It's what's going to really motivate you. What are your values? What's important to you? And how do we operate on that level? And not every call does do a bunch of tools come up necessarily. Sometimes it's just looking at the things we talked about prior, the action items that came from the last call. What action items got completed? What got in the way? Did things work out? If something didn't work out, what got in the way? Let's look at what got in the way and address that. So sometimes there are tools, sometimes just talking out loud about what you're going through can help all of us get clarity on stuff that just is rattling around in our heads. So it just really depends. There's not always tools. Sometimes there are tools. Sometimes there are a couple of things you can do.
Okay. My next question actually is for Gen Z specifically, and for Taylor specifically, and even Ava Behar, who's on this call, who also met at Marin Horizon, who's magnificent and the best ever principal, head of school, is on tonight too, Roz. Which is so wonderful. It's like our little reunion. You know, I say to Taylor all the time, and I've been saying to her and to her friends, you know, don't worry. You know, we're going to get through this, and actually, you're going to get through this better and stronger. And sometimes she can hear that, and sometimes not. And I guess I never stopped to think how she's hearing that. And in general, if you were putting out a document that was for all Gen Z, would you say that is the right message? Or do they even hear us when they say that, when we say that?
Well, I think that our kids kind of don't hear it when it comes from a parent sometimes, or they think, yeah. I think rather than here's what I think you're going to get out of it, I think it's really valuable to ask them what they want to get out of it, that they've got their answer, and it's going to resonate more for them if it's an answer that's true for them. So maybe change the question of, what would you like to get out of this? Or when you look back at this time and you feel glad about who you were or how you handled things or what you've learned from this, what would that be? Have them do the reflection, because their answer is going to be unique to them and more meaningful for them. Or I would also ask them, what advice would you give a friend? What would you hope for your friends to get out of this? Or if you wanted them to know it was going to be okay. Sometimes I think sometimes as parents, I think we project what we want onto them. I want you to know you're going to be okay. Then I'll be more comfortable. But I think it's really about, what do they want? And what's important to them? What's going to motivate them? How do they want to come out of this and feel strong and proud? What does that look like to them? And how can we support them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's, if we're overwhelmed and we're the boomers, right? And that's why I really resonating what you're saying about, because if they do that, then we'll feel better that somehow we've helped them through it, because it is so enormous for them, because it's all about inheriting what we are leaving them. And at present, it feels we're leaving them an enormous mess on many, many levels.
Right.
And so I think the gravity of the situation is what's making it feel so helpless. So I think that's really, it makes sense, right? To do the obvious and say, what do you want? What would you like to do to, you know, and so I will try that. And Ava, you are welcome to put in the chat and tell us what you think you would like. And because pretty much it I think is representative of no longer kids, but young adults your age. And it would be interesting to know.
And I think
go ahead.
I think one thing too is, when things are so out of control and so much is out of our control, then we look at, well, what can I control? And that's where we focus. What are the things that I can control that will give me a sense of control, that will give me some agency? And that's where I want to move. That's another thing that they can do, or any of us can do.
Wonderful. Shelley, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that I think also for this generation, these kids or young people graduating from college right now, there are all these benchmarks in life. I mean, we use them as professionals and we set them for ourselves, what the goals and benchmarks that define success for us. And at this point in their lives, they're transitioning from a place where they were always carried by parents, a teacher, even a professor, caring professor, hall monitor or whatever, you know, just some, and now they're going out into the world where people really don't care, you know, as much about them as the people. And I think right now, to feel even more isolated, and to try, and what I hear you talking about is really listening to people and having them direct what it is that they want to do next. It's coming from them because that's the only way it'll work.
Right.
And so for a young person who's always had all these kind of protective shells around them that are kind of falling away one by one, it's hard to find that center.
Yeah. But one way to find it is look at your values. What are those things in life that you really, really value? And they're things like integrity or creativity or making a difference or, think honesty, whatever they are. They don't have to be culturally appropriate. They can be whatever speaks to you as an individual. And when we do action that is aligned with our values, there's an internal rightness that we feel. And when we do actions that step on our values, or we're in situations that step on our values, there's no getting away from the fact that it feels bad. It just does. And you can't cover it up too much for very long successfully. So go to your values. What are those things that speak to you as a person? And they don't have to be values that anybody else in your family cares about. It can be, what do you care about? And how do you do action coming from that? Use your values as a filter and go towards things that resonate with your values. And it's just a tool that they can use. Actually, all of us can use.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it seems so obvious, right? That our values are the core part of our character.
Right.
And who we are, how we behave, how we treat others, how we regard ourselves. And yet the number of times that, because we're human, we do something for another reason that clearly steps on one of those values or more than one of those values. And it's exhausting and it just feels crap. I mean, it really is a physical response when we do that, speaking from experience. So, Shelley, do we have questions in chat?
We do not yet, but we can take this opportunity if anybody has a question to ask it, or you can raise your hand or unmute yourself and.
Yes, please. It's, this is your mini coaching session here, each of you, to ask of Jody some of the things that you've been thinking about in terms of the tools that you've used or how you're feeling about the current situation and ways in which you've been dealing with it or wish you could deal with it better. Happy to hear those questions too. While we're waiting for that, Jody, I know because you have spoken at events and different seminars, etc., that I've attended. What I've noticed in the people who are proud to tell me they work with you, because I know you obviously have the cone of silence and not revealing who you work with, but everybody that I have introduced you to has just waxed poetic about just how life-changing it is, and the thing that was so magical that each person would point to, and all these people don't even know each other, would say, gosh, it just felt so easy. I thought it was going to be complicated. I thought I was going to have all these assignments, but I was going to sign up because I had to, whatever, get over this career roadblock, understand why I wasn't succeeding like I should have, understand why I was constantly preventing myself from making as much money as I wanted to make, whatever it was, and that you were able to do that. If somebody wants to be coached by you, what is that process look like? How is it just a matter of getting in touch with you and saying help?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's pretty flexible. The beautiful thing about the coaching relationship is the coach and coachee kind of create the relationship, and we set it up in a way that works for the coachee. And so it's usually 45 minutes. We talk about at the end of the call any action items. If somebody's overwhelmed and can't do any action items, we don't put action items on. But they're mutually agreed upon. they're things that are going to move somebody forward, but they are not onerous, or usually they're things that people have throughout the conversation decided, God, I should do that. That would be really helpful. They're not me saying, okay, I've made a list of to-dos. It's not like that. It's really kind of tapping into some of that inner knowledge that you already have that you can't access, and to get that out, because you're your own expert on you. Nobody else is going to know exactly how to motivate you like you are. And so how to tap into that. And so it can be really pretty fun and pretty inspiring to see, what happens. It's not, and you can even come unprepared and we still get lots of gold out of it. So
I was going to say, how about for parenting? Any parenting guides? Does this apply to parenting? But that's what we have a couple of questions from Terry. As a non-therapist, how can I help my team have these conversations in a safe way?
So I would wonder, how big is the team? How can you help teams have these conversations? It's got to feel really, really safe. Because if you're asking people to really be honest and open, it's got to be an environment where that's safe. And I think also leading by example, but asking people maybe what would they want to participate? What would create a safe environment for them? What would be some topics that people would want to have or talk about? Or I'd start out kind of small and see what are people responding to? What's working? What's not working? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Wow. Well, actually, to that end, Anita, Shelley, I'm sorry, here I'm stepping on what you were probably just about to do, but AnitaBaker would like to share something with all of us that I have a feeling, Anita, is going to help all of us take what Jody just said a step farther. So please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Jody.
Hi.
Yeah, Michela introduced me to Jody. So I guess it was a couple of years ago, and I was kind of going from this to that and trying to grab onto things and trying to also create some structure for myself and some kind of internal motivation for myself as well. And one thing that you told me that I grab onto all the time was it was a visualization. I'm a visual person, and I remember it was visualizing myself in a place where I felt really comfortable, and something that I wanted, I could see was coming towards me, and I could describe it, in really great detail. And it happened to me on a beach, and there was a guy coming, and but one thing and the other. And but every time I kind of felt like uncertain about something, I could go back and remember that visual, and it gave me a really wonderful feeling. And it also put me in touch with something that I envisioned that I wanted to work towards, but it gave me a calm feeling about it. So thank you for that. I use that all the time.
Yay. That's so good to hear. You're very welcome. I'm glad that is helpful.
Wonderful. Go ahead, Shelley. You want to read the question?
Oh, come on. Go ahead. There's one from someone you might know down there.
Okay. I think you should unmute yourself and do that, Taylor Abrams. Can you? No?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
can hear you.
Okay, it wasn't a question, more just a comment on how wonderful and inspiring you are. And I just think this conversation is so important because, especially as a fellow Gen Z, I think mental health has such a stigma. And I was just saying that I wished more people felt comfortable to speak more openly about this. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's great to hear your voice. Thank you, Taylor.
Okay, we have a question from Catherine. She says, thanks for the point about the space. I most appreciate the insight on values and when they not only are in alignment, but diametrically opposed and toxic. How do you recover from that?
Well, there's no getting around toxic values. It's never going to feel okay. You have to move away from it as much as you can and do as many things you can do that honor your values. Really firmly get planted in your own values and And you can even use it as a filter, where if you're looking for a job or a relationship or something like that, check and see if your values are there. If they are not there, that is a huge red flag. And so to kind of detox, what else can you do? That's where you get back to being in nature, or also paying attention to what are the things that got me into that situation so that I don't repeat those. I'd want to know, how did I get into it? Is there a way, what did I learn from that? Is there a way that I can avoid that in the future?
Excellent. Shelley, next.
Well, there isn't another question, but I was thinking just now actually about redirecting. It's almost like it reminded me of my golden retriever when she barks, and I redirect her attention to something else, a cookie or whatever it is, to stop that behavior. But it reminds me of redirecting, something that I'm learning and have only learned in the last five years of my life, really, about redirecting that energy that you, and it is what you're talking about, that space. But I think that the challenge can be that in that space, sometimes it's between ego and fear, where you go back and forth between those two. But leaving that space open can also sometimes feel threatening. Does that make sense? Like you feel you're leaving it open for more of a threat, more vulnerability.
Well, I think that's a fear, though. And so that's still fear making the decision. And you don't want fear to be the one driving the bus. And so I would note that and put fear in the back seat, because fear, you're not going to get where you want to go with fear driving the bus. And so so what do you do to get fear? And one of the questions you can ask yourself is, if I knew it was going to be okay, what would I be doing? If I knew I could trust this, if I knew it would be okay, what would I do? Because that pops you out of fear mode and oh, if it was okay, if I knew it would be okay, what would I be doing right now? That's where you want to come from. If I could say anything, what would I say? Not that you say it, but just first get out so you know what you would say. If I could really just say anything, the message I really want to get across, what would that be? A lot of times when I ask that question, people who don't know what they want to do or don't know what they want to say, with that question, come out with exactly what they want to say. It's kind of funny, but to get out of fear, if everything was going to be okay, where would I go, or what would I do? I'm just trying to think of what else would I do to pop out of fear. That's, you can look at, what is fear costing me? What's the cost of having this fear? How is this fear impacting me? We're at more choice than we realize. And so know that you have more choice at choosing how you want to come at things. There's this really funny exercise we do in coaching, and it's called a balance exercise. And it's where you look at something from your perspective, like a fear perspective. And then you actually physically get up and move, and you stand someplace else, and you look at the same topic that you're looking at, but you look at it from a different perspective. Like, if I was the Dalai Lama, how would I perceive this? And then you look at it from another. If I was my golden retriever, how would I look at this? And you actually can come up with about a bunch of different perspectives. And you really do get to have more choices to where you want to come from. We just get stuck in one, and we feel like we have no other options. So it really is figuring out how to pop yourself out of that and come at it from a different angle. And so, but if fear is the angle that you're in, or if fear is driving the bus, it has a cost to it. And it's not a cost you want to pay. So it is popping out into a different perspective.
Another member of our community, Drew, says, often fear leads to anger, right? Which is the most toxic place from fear. How do you move once you've already gone from fear into anger and really way down the road there? Please ask, are there any other tools to pop out of that and at least get to the back seat where fear was supposed to be before it went to anger?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've learned is that anger is an umbrella, and underneath anger are a whole bunch of different emotions. So try to see what's under fear or what's under anger. And there's a great TED Talk. It's by a woman who is a Harvard professor, and she talks about how our emotion of fear is really a signpost to some value that's getting stepped on, that's some value that's getting compromised, some value that's not present. So I would try and see what you can do, and maybe through morning pages, write and see what's under fear, what's under anger, because there's something else under it. And that's where you want to address it. You want to address it, the underlying thing. That's where you're going to get your shift. And in the meantime, if you're angry, try not to like lash out at somebody, but stop, pause, really think about what is getting triggered. Try to unpeel the onion, because there's something else under there getting stepped on.
The writer, Elizabeth Gilbert, had this wonderful, I heard her in an interview, or I saw a post about fear being an instinct, and remembering that fear is an instinct. It's not something that, and she thinks of it as a toddler that she puts in the back seat, and the toddler in the back seat of the car, and it can yammer and everything, but she's just going to keep on driving and put up the divider if possible.
Yeah. And like a toddler, when you say no to it, it can get bigger all of a sudden too. But then it blows over, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly, hopefully. Did that help, Drew? Great, wonderful. Okay, well, we are right at our end, and I want to thank you, Jody, so much for sharing this time with us, this hour of sanity and new ideas. I hope everybody will take any one of these suggestions and work through whatever level of anxiety, fear, frustration, just, mild annoyance, because it seems like being able to do this, whether it's writing that down, thinking of what you want to work through before you go to sleep. If you wake up at 3, you can call me, and then I'll call Jody later. Anyway. But thank you very much for giving us your time and the tools that could help put us in a little bit better place, each of us, Jody. Thank you. So really, and I want to let everybody know that next Monday, we will be joined by New York Post editor Keith Kelly, whom I've known for a very long time, because it was the dreaded editor that would have all the scoop on media, and that we often didn't want him to have, but he's willing to join us and talk about where we are in that media cycle and what's going on. And so stay tuned for Monday night with Keith Kelly. And thank you so much. I want everybody to have a great week. And Jody will be back again in a couple months, so stay tuned for that. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Really great. Thank you.
Jody, thank you.
It's been really fun.
Thank you
Really
so
great.
much.
Thanks, Jody.